Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Isaiah. After completing chapter 13, we are now in chapter 14. And it continues to tell us that God, and this is the name of God, will have mercy on Jacob and will still choose Israel and settle them in their own land. The strangers would be joined with them, and they will cling to the house of Jacob. Now, as we begin, we should take note of the introduction. It says, God will have mercy on Jacob, and this is an A, and will still choose Israel, and this is a B. So that we understand the idea of have mercy and choose is really to say that God will not abandon Israel. But I just want to just highlight for our purposes the idea of mercy here is the idea of compassion, the idea of raham. Let me just explain this. Raham or mercy in the form of raham should also be read as compassion. And it has to do with punishment. Mercy is really the punishment in the sense that, when you have a punishment, you can have a spectrum of extreme punishment or light punishment. And so we are made to understand that whenever you think of the idea of mercy or kindness shown on something like what we are reading here with regards to the judgments of God, well, you find that compassion will be with regards to cutting down the punishment to move it from very severe to light. That is mercy. When there is no mercy, it will be severe. When there is mercy, it will be lighter. And so that's the idea that God will have mercy, that the judgment of God, eventually, when they are sent to Babylon, there will be a time for them to come back. It would not be perpetual. And God will bring them back into their own land. Now, in this first few verses, it would seem that it is talking about a time when uh, when they will eventually be punished. They will eventually be in Babylon, but one day they will return. And that would be the prophecy. Now, strangers, this would be the ger. Today, when we read this in this chapter, we should be paying attention that this refers to the Babylonians. The Babylonians who joined the Jews to return. And they will cling to the house of Jacob. See, the ger in definition would be those who embrace the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We see this in the book of Ruth, where we are studying that. Then people. Now, this idea in verse 2, people will be the nations, will take them and bring them back to their place in the promised land. And these peoples will include the Medo Persian. The house of Israel will possess them for servants and maids in the land of the Lord. They will take them captive, whose captives they were. So the Jews were captives of the Babylonians, and now the Babylonians will serve the Jews in return and rule over their oppressors. That's a very poetic way of saying that the Babylonians have embraced their faith and joined the Jews back into the land. We come to verse 3. Now, verse 3 says that they will come to pass in the day the Lord gives you rest from your sorrow. Now think of it this way: there is a time that God will grant them rest. Rest means no longer oppressed, no longer in exile. Remember, during the time of the future, now we're talking about the future of when this is written. The future of when this is written would be at the time of Babylon. And that would be a song that everybody remembers: by the rivers of Babylon, there we wept. It's part of the psalm. It is a day of reckoning that the time of sorrow in Babylon, God will give them rest and bring them back. For your fear and the hard bondage in which you were made to serve, that you will take up this proverb against the king of Babylon. Now we need to remember, from here on, it is about the king of Babylon, not just Babylon, but the king of Babylon. This will be Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the most fearsome king of the king of Babylon. Now, we may not appreciate how much of a tyrant he is, but he indeed is extremely powerful and extremely wicked and extremely everything. He thinks of himself as the only on earth equal to God. And so this proverb, and we need to understand in verse 4, this would be a song. Right? You think of it as a song that you sing. Is a parable that depicts Nebuchadnezzar. And this is how the parable or the song or the proverb goes. It says this: how has the oppressor ceased? The oppressor, Nebuchadnezzar, has ceased. So this is about the time after Nebuchadnezzar. The golden city ceased, and this would be the city of Babylon. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers. Still talking about Babylon. The whole chunk here talks about Babylon. He who struck the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he who ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted and no one hinders. Remember, this he is Nebuchadnezzar. After Nebuchadnezzar, it says the whole earth is at rest and quiet. They break forth into singing. All the nations that Nebuchadnezzar took over never had peace, and he was very brutal. But when he is no longer around, there will be rest and there will be tranquility. They will break into singing. That's a very poetic way of saying, wow, it's time where anything compared to the king of Babylon, it's much better. Verse 8 says, indeed, the cypress trees rejoice over you, the cedars of Lebanon or Lebanon, these are big trees. It seems that we're using a very poetic language. It says that since you were cut down, no woodsman has come up against us. That at the time of Babylon, he used a lot of trees for construction. And when he is no longer around, nobody cuts down trees. Now that's a very poetic way of saying there is peace. Verse 9 comes and say, this is King James. It shouldn't be translated hell. It is Sheol. And this is Sheol from underneath. Now, Sheol from underneath. The Sheol is a Hebrew word to talk about the place of the dead, right? The place of the dead. And it says the place of the dead from under is excited about you. waiting to receive Nebuchadnezzar to meet you at your coming. Remember, all this is very poetic. This is not a didactic passage. It says it stirs up the dead for you, wakes up the dead, and all the chief ones of the earth has raised up from their thrones, all the kings of the nations. These are the ones who have died. Says they all of these who have died shall speak and say to you, have you also become as weak as we? Have you become like us? This is words of mocking. When he is alive, he treats everybody as dirt. When he is dead, the kings who were just as powerful in the past tells him, well, we are now like nothing. And that is a poetic language. That is to remind all these people who sing this parable that even when you are way up there in full power, one day you will become like nothing. Very similar to ancient Chinese stories as well. Verse 11 continues, your pomp, your arrogance has brought you down to Sheol. Now, this is a correct translation. Now, I don't understand why the first one, the New King James, translate as hell, but that is very much a modern day word. But Sheol is the right word. The sound of your stringed instruments, the maggot is spread under you, and the worms cover you, depicts death and decay for King Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, we are still reading about King of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. So this song continues to say, how you are fallen from heaven. Now, this idea of heaven, understand that in the old days, the word heaven actually means the skies. You who have fallen, and remember, you would be Nebuchadnezzar. And it says, O Lucifer, son of the morning, how you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations. I think we need a little bit of clarification here. This word, Lucifer, is from the Hebrew word, Hillel. Now, Hillel actually means the bright star, right? The bright star, or the morning star. And this would be the brightest star in the morning. Most of the time, we would think of it as Venus in the morning. There is no name called Lucifer, so I'll strike this off. And by way of uh, information, let me just say this. The word Lucifer only appears in the King James. And it was there in the King James because the King James translator decided to pick, instead of the Hebrew word Hillel, he used the word um, Lucifer. Now, the word Lucifer is not anything special, I guess. We could say that, how should we say? We should say that this word Lucifer is the Latin, and the Latin Lucifer means luciferous, something that's shining, right? Something that is shining. And that is what Lucifer actually means. Unfortunately, the King James translator took this and made it into a name. But for our purposes today, please remember that this word is Hillel, and it means morning star or bright star. And it refers to Nebuchadnezzar. So it goes on to say, you who are cut down to the ground, that's the destruction of Nebuchadnezzar. You who weakened the nations, he went out and oppressed all the nations that he has conquered. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into the skies. This is the same word. Now, we may think of heaven as the heavenly abode, but this is really the skies. He thinks of himself as someone so high up. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Now, many think that this stars of God refers to the people of God. Now, perhaps it may be the people of God, or perhaps they may be literal stars that God made. He says, I will also sit on the mount of congregation, the mount of assembly. And this mount of assembly is located on the farther sides of the north. So we know the geography. You find that Israel would be down here. And then way up north, this part here would be Babylon. And so this is what it means by farthest north. And it says that I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. So think of it this way. We have the sky and we have the stars. We have the clouds. And he says that I will be like God the Most High. And this is sheer arrogance, right? He says that he will be lifted up there. This is sheer arrogance. Now, can Nebuchadnezzar say that? Absolutely. When Nebuchadnezzar was the king, he was the most powerful man of the then known world. And how powerful he is and how he treats people, it's all in the history books. But in the Bible, we see him also as one really wicked, arrogant king. And in the book of Daniel, Daniel was able to engage with Nebuchadnezzar. And the fact that God gave him that dream of the metallic image also depicts Nebuchadnezzar as Babylon, the head of gold. And so his arrogance is not without reason. He is absolutely most powerful. Now, I think we need to also remember that in Isaiah chapter 36, verse 20, we have Sennacherib. Sennacherib also says, who among all the gods of the land saved their land from my hand? He is so powerful that the gods cannot fight with Sennacherib. Now, he is the king of Assyria. We can also read in Ezekiel, and that would be in chapter 28, verse 2, King Hiram of Tyre. And he says that he is like God as well. And so Nebuchadnezzar, Sennacherib, Hiram, they are all kings of the Goyim. And when they are powerful, they become very arrogant. And so they think that they are greater than God. And that God says, you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the hole. Verse 15 says, the well, the pit, or the well, or the hole in the ground. And so this is about the place of the dead. Essentially saying to Nebuchadnezzar, when you die, you're in the same place as everybody else. That's how the ancients think of the afterlife. That Sheol, whatever that is, wherever that is the place where everyone goes. It doesn't matter whether you are Nebuchadnezzar or Sennacherib or Hiram, or the man on the street. And so this is a reminder that arrogance will one day be struck down, and this is by God, and they will be remembered no more. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you. Say, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities, who did not open the house of his prisoners? This is a description of the works of Nebuchadnezzar. This is how people will remember him. It says, is this the chap who seems to be so powerful, whom who shake kingdoms and the nations around the world, the then world, fear him so much? He would not release prisoners, and he's there in the hole. All the kings of the nations, all of them sleep in glory, everyone in his own house. But you are cast out of your grave like an abominable branch. Now, this part here requires a little bit of the history. Now, after Nebuchadnezzar dies, everybody is at ease, at peace. But Nebuchadnezzar doesn't have any peace whatsoever. And so from this part, verse 19 onwards, describes why he has no peace absolutely. It tells us that he is cast out of his grave. He can't even rest in peace. He is thrown up like a branch that is decaying, right? Uh, and then it says he is like a garment of those who are slain, very bloodied, thrust through with a sword, all damaged, who go down to the stones of the pit like a corpse trodden underfoot. He has no more demeanor, right? No more demeanor. You will not be joined with them in burial. He has no burial, no place for a grave, because you have destroyed your land and slain your people. The brood of evildoers shall never be named. It means that the name of Nebuchadnezzar will never be remembered. We are actually told in the history books that he had a son called Evil Merodach, and he wanted to make sure that uh, at the time of Daniel chapter 4, where he was indisposed, uh, Evil Merodach, the son, was actually taking care of the empire. And when he recovered from his illness, he actually was not happy at all. After King Nebuchadnezzar died, Evil Merodach, which is the son, really wanted to make doubly sure that his father was really dead. And so he dug him out of the grave to make sure that his father was absolutely dead. Otherwise, he is so afraid that he will come back and kill him. And so he had to make sure that he is absolutely dead. And this part here really reminds us of that event, even as a prophecy in the song that Nebuchadnezzar could not die in peace because of how seriously grievous he is against everyone around him. It says here, uh, prepare the slaughter for his children because of the iniquities of their fathers, lest they rise up and possess the land and fill the face of the world with cities. What we do see in verse 21. This is the kind of fear of the people. The nations fear Nebuchadnezzar, that when Nebuchadnezzar had died, they really don't want his children to take over because they may just continue being as corrupt and evil as the father. And that's the whole passage here in verse 21, that they are so worried that they could have a continuation of Nebuchadnezzar, that it's their wish that none of the children will be around. In verse 22, God says, and this is very important, God says this: I will rise up against them, including the children, and cut off Babylon, the name and remnant, offspring and posterity. Now, how do we read this in the Hebrew? It's quite interesting. In verse 22, this word offspring is child. And in verse 22, the last part here, literally means posterity would be the son's son, right? The son's sons, or the grandchildren. And so it is a prophecy that it says here God will cut off. This word is karat. This word literally means cause an end of Babylon. It's not like an instantaneous, but there will be an end that eventually, when it gets to the grandchildren, there will be no more. Now, it was said that Queen Vashti, the queen of Ahasuerus, in the book of Esther, was the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's what is commonly talked about. But basically, it is for us, it suffices for us to know that God is not allowing that to happen. I will also make it a possession for the porcupine marshes of muddy water, and I will sweep it with the broom of destruction, says the Lord of hosts. And basically, this is a very poetic language that says that God is going to clean the place of the Babylonian memory. Now, up to this point in verse 23, it is the end of Babylon. And that is a very sure prophecy in verse 23. In verse 24, we now turn our attention. The prophecy tells us about Assyria. Jehovah Tsebaot has sworn, saying, surely I have thought, and so it shall come to pass. As I have purposed, so it shall stand. Now, this is a very interesting expression. When God swears or makes an oath, an oath in the name of God is extremely severe. When the Jews are making an oath, they are told that when they make an oath in the name of God, they must deliver an honor, else don't make the oath. Because the penalty of breaking the oath or not fulfilling the oath is death. And so when it says God has sworn and made an oath in his own name, he is serious that it will come to pass. And that's how it is expressed. And this is what God says. In verse 24 now, it says, if I have thought it, right? If I've thought it, it will come to pass. Thought means I have thought to do something. Or to plan something. then God will bring it to pass, make happen. If I have purposed, this idea of purpose means the same idea of conspire or plan, then it shall stand. Now, the word stand is established. And so here, remember, we have always said that there is a pair, an A and a B. Both of these statements talk about the same thing. Because God made an oath in his name, it will happen. God will make it happen. The difference between what man does and what God does is that when man says that they will do something, there is a limit to it. When God says he will do something, he will do something. And so we find that serious difference in the idea of, say, blessing. When God blesses someone, the words that he utters will come to pass. When man utters a blessing, it is a well wish, a hopeful expression, a good expression of nice thoughts. There is no ability in most cases to even remotely do something about that. That's the difference between when God says something and he says it in a very stern and severe and oath oath sounding type of plan. Yes. So the oath itself already tells us that when God makes an oath, he will honor it. And so this is the poetic expression of what he says will come to pass. That I will break the Assyrian in my land. What does that mean? We're talking about the nation before Babylon. And that would be the nation at the time of Isaiah when he is prophesying this. In my land means in the land of Israel, because the Assyrians will come into Israel and have taken away the northern kingdom. And on my mountains tread him underfoot. His yoke shall be removed from them, his burden removed from their shoulders. So the Assyrians will be first taken care of by God. So God has put this to bear. The first kingdom that he will use to teach Israel a lesson, God will also remove them. And so this is the purpose that is purpose against the whole earth or the whole land. I think this would be a better way to express it. And this is the hand that is stretched out over all the nations, and this would be the Goyim. So let me just pause here to just at least help us understand. This is the oath that God has made. And in this oath, it says that the Goyim kingdoms will be removed from the land. Now, you need to understand that they were the ones that God allowed to teach Israel a lesson, but there is a time frame to it. And the time frame, when it comes, God will remove them. And that is what it means, that all of these punishment that God made to Israel, first the northern kingdom, then the southern kingdom, has a time period. Has a time period. Now they are duly reminded, for the Lord of hosts has purposed, and the word purposed means have planned, right? Have planned, have given thought, have planned, have given thought, and he is going to execute his plan. Who, in verse 27, is going to annul it? The idea of annul is to cause it to be frustrated. Basically, is to make it to no effect. Make to no effect. Who dares to make God's plan to no effect? His hand is stretched out. Who will turn it back? Now remember, when this is said, these words are not a general word of promise. This is related to the Goyim. So when we read such passages, let us be mindful that it is related to these nations, that is, over Israel, that God will break their control, remove all these burdens, and that would be the promise to Israel that all this will has a time frame. In verse 28, this is the third section of chapter 14, and it is a time. Now, this one says it's the burden. Remember, in verse 1, this is a prophecy, which means that at this time of speaking, that God spoke to Isaiah, it hasn't happened yet. This came in the year that King Ahaz died. Ahaz is the father of Hezekiah. And this is with regards to the Philistines. It says, do not rejoice, all you Philistines. So at that point in time, the Philistines is always the perennial enemies of Israel. And so it says, do not rejoice just because King Ahaz died. There is a young king called Hezekiah. The rod that struck you is broken. Out of the serpent's roots will come forth a viper. And this viper is Hezekiah. The serpent's roots is Ahaz. And its offspring will be a fiery serpent. Hezekiah. Then we are all talking about a poetic language, right? It's a poetic way. It's not to say that he's a serpent in itself. The firstborn of the poor will feed, the needy will lie down in safety. I will kill your roots with famine, and it will slay your remnant. It tells us that at the end of the day, even the Philistines will be destroyed. And so this is a time when peace and honor of God will happen. It says, wail, O gate, cry, O city, all you of Philistia dissolved. For smoke will come from the north, and no one will be alone at his appointed times. The time of assembly. So what does it mean, come from the north? And this is a bit of the geography again. In the land of Israel, this would be Jerusalem. And the area of the Philistines are down here. This is the area of Philistines, and Gaza is the main center of the 5 cities of the Philistines. Right? This is the Philistine area. And so from the north, that is north. Right? This is north to the Philistine territory. In verse 32, what will they answer the messengers of the nation? The messengers of the nation, this is the Goyim. What will they answer the messengers of the Goyim? This in itself sounds a bit cryptic, actually, but perhaps you could say that this is what may be expressed. How will Israel answer the messengers of the nation. What will the Israelite say uh, to the messenger of the Goyim? Well, the answer that they would say at the time, at this time after Achatz, would be Hezekiah. And at the time of Hezekiah, the the fundamental message that we should know is that Hezekiah brings about peace in the land. The Lord has established Zion. The poor of his people shall take refuge in it. And Hezekiah reversed all the practices of the father, Achatz, and that people will know that peace will come back to Israel and Zion will be established one more time, will be seen as the city of God. Right? And so this is a reminder that after all that's said about the Philistines, there will be peace in the land after Achatz, and this is the time of the prophecy, and indirectly telling us this is what is going to happen to Hezekiah. The period of Hezekiah will be a great period. Now, with this, we come to the end of our session today.